there's a two-pronged approach you're proposing. When I come back to Professor Beckles, who is an economic historian, in case you don't know, and has some knowledge of these matters. So, Hilary.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, and I thank you for invoking the historical perspective. It's important because most of our countries have become independent just over 50 years in the English-speaking sub-region, 100 years in the Spanish-speaking area. But we have to face the fact that when we enter the nation-building process in a structured way, in a constitutional way, we also inherited some of the colonial debt that was passed on. And we have to understand that, I think, to know that many of these nations started their journey into nation building with an inherited colonial debt and a propensity to carry that debt. What I believe our governments have been doing since the 1960s and 70s, and I have used the expression more than once, that we have really been cleaning up the colonial mess. Now, let's assume that we have been cleaning up the colonial mess. Many of our governments have spent an enormous amount of money on health, education, infrastructure, just to turn these colonies into living spaces. Because the fact is that when we inherited them at independence, they were not suitable for living a civil democratic life. They were colonies. And I think we might have pushed ourselves very far into an expenditure schedule to create for the citizens a living place. And a fair share of the domestic debt has to do with cleaning up the health problem, eradicating illiteracy, removing the ghettos from our societies, and governments did generate a significant domestic debt in that regard. So on the external front, I do agree with that, which is why in the CARICOM Reparations Commission, in the 10-point plan, which we have asked the heads to approve, one of the points in that plan is the elimination of the external debt. And that is one of the issues that we have framed in there as a process of reparatory justice. Because let's face the facts, globalization is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it speaks to openness, to level playing fields. But the fact is that when you look at the politics of globalization and the economics of globalization, they are going in different directions. It is about rich nations versus weak nations. It's a conflict between powerful nations and weak nations. And there is a transfer of resources out of the smaller, weaker nations into the rich and powerful nations. And this is what globalization is. This is why we have this conflict between the political rhetoric of globalization and the economic reality of it, which is a transfer of value out of the poor, vulnerable countries into the sustainable developed countries. And the debt is also a part of that process. Now, we speak oftentimes about the importance of equity and equality. And we heard Secretary General speaking about the importance of equity and equality. It's an interesting philosophy. It's a great concept. But the fact is that if that idea of equity and equality emerges out of Western discourse, the fact is that the powerful nations of the West do not believe in it. So it's a beautiful rhetorical tool within the traditions of philosophy and so on. But in the practice of the economic relationship, the notion of equality between the powerful nations and the weaker nations, it is not practiced. So we are fighting to bring realistic validity to the meaning of equality and the politics of equality. And this is something that we have to win. And I certainly hope that in these conversations we say to the developed countries, you speak the rhetoric of equality, we need a political engagement of equality. And we want the reality of it implemented within our world relations.
I buy your care and buy your argument.
Good afternoon, I think it is, to all. Bruce Blackman, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Culture, Sports and Youth. I have listened to everything that has transpired and I agree with what has been said. But the question that lingers for me is, after the debt relief, what? We also heard about restructuring of economies and so on. And my friend from CEDA, she spoke to part of the issue that I was going to address, and that is education. I had privilege of visiting Prince Edward Island and looking at the interaction between their university and their people. Very little was taught in that university that was not relevant to the economy itself. In other words, they met the demands of their society so that when their residents, their people went to university to study, they knew exactly why they were pursuing what they were pursuing, because it blended perfectly with the goals of that community. I tend to think that sometimes we lose sight of that in the Caribbean. We go to university, we study to get a degree, but sometimes we do not always plan in our curriculum to meet the needs of our society. So a lot of our young people leave university and then there's no work. So you speak then to the relevance of the educational system.
Okay.
The other point is, former Prime Minister of Jamaica spoke at one of the presentations in Bahamas, a conference there, about leveraging the cultural and human assets of the region to assist in our economic development. And I think that sometimes we still stick to the traditional when we have other assets that can be deployed to assist in diversifying our community.
Okay.
Right? For example, CTO, tourism. Our tourism in the Caribbean is a mature offering. We need diversification.
Okay.
And this is where culture can help. And culture can also help as a tool in changing mindsets, because we can use what culture has as a medium to change a lot of the mindsets that we have.
Okay.
But I think it's the forgotten asset. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So Hilary, your minute. You have 60 seconds. Let me be precise.
Thank you, Sir George. This morning, Sir George, SG Sharma spoke about the power of ideas to frame a new paradigm. And we heard from Mr. Riley of the CTO about the power of ideas. I think I need to say something about that. What is clear to me is that our development agenda, our development momentum has slowed considerably. We are anxious about having it rekindled. And many of the problems we discussed this morning, whether they were the mobilization of boys and the lack of throughput from graduates, all of those things are part of the frustrating effects of what really is a slowing economy and doubt about whether we can have it rekindled. But at the same time, I think we need to look at those external shocks that we heard about and the internal inhibitions that we said we must discuss. We need to see both the external shocks issue as well as the internal inhibitions. What are the forces that are holding back the potential of Caribbean people on the inside? The issue of citizenship is important in all of this. We do not, our citizens in the Caribbean are not as democratically engaged as they ought to be. We know they vote in the parliamentary process, but the issue of economic engagement of citizens is still a big problem for us. Our economies are managed by elites and small minorities. Our wealth is controlled by small minorities. We have not democratized the wealth. We have not brought the people into wealth generation. We are still running minority economies, and this is an issue, and citizens must participate in economic life as a matter of course. The issue of boys is important. This relates to the lack of diversity in our economies. If you take an examination of all of our tertiary institutions, what you will find is that the boys have not retreated from higher education. The boys are going into science and technology faculties. The only faculties where the boys are the majority is science and technology, because the boys are looking for a certain kind of activity. They're not going to humanities because traditionally they went there and became civil servants. They do not wish to go into the public sector. They wish to go into the private sector, and they go into science, technology. That's where they go, and that's where the boys are going. So yes, we need to diversify the economic system to allow the boys to have an output. But I agree with all of you who said the higher education system has to be realigned. It has to be realigned to the economies. It has to be restructured to accommodate economic growth. It has to be reorganized to push innovation. And that is precisely the point which I wish to discuss tomorrow. Thank you very much for the ability. So yes, I think we have a question before us of rekindling the Caribbean Revolution. We need to rekindle it. We need to find the ideas to rebuild the confidence we once had, to re-energize ourselves once again. This is the second phase of nation building. Our countries have now been independent 50 years. This is the second phase we're going into, and we need more energy and we need new ideas. So I say, Chancellor, let us take a new guard and let us find a way to sit and rekindle the Caribbean Revolution of self-reliance, independence, and sovereignty.
Thanks very much.